Okay, so I'm going to talk about Manifiesto País today because I've always been fascinated by how people, and especially writers, engage with the concept of national identity. But I am very aware that there are people in this room who know a lot more about it than me, including Colette and Eric, who both actually took part in the exhibition. So I'm hoping that later we'll be able to talk a bit more about it and kind of from their side. So from the 18th of May to the 31st of August 2014, the Sala Mendoza at the Universidad Central de Venezuela played host to Manifiesto País, an exhibition featuring responses by 66 Venezuelan writers, from big names to beginners, critics and intellectuals, to the question of what País means to them. Each text has been transformed into a visual artwork inspired by Soviet posters, advertising, Dada, and mass movements, a fusion of words and images conceived by Lisbeth Salas and developed by the design duo Pedro Quintero and Cesar Jara. As well as the exhibition, one poster was published online each day throughout June and July by Pro Da Vinci, which allowed access to the works to those Venezuelans abroad who were unable to attend the exhibition in person. The exhibition's curator, Lisbeth Salas, described in an interview with El Nacional how a todos los hice la misma petición, que definieran la palabra país. La idea era que hablaran sobre cómo lo ven, qué esperan de ese futuro que al parecer no tenemos, de cómo rescatar la nación desde la memoria, el recuerdo y hasta desde el exilio. Todos estamos viviendo lo mismo, independientemente de dónde estemos parados. Lo cierto es que Venezuela ya no es lo que era, y tampoco sabemos lo que es. In this paper, I aim to place this need for writers to define what nation means to them as individuals today in the context of a long history of prescriptive nationalism within Venezuela. I will begin with an overview of how literature has always been seen as a nation-building tool in Venezuela, and how through its rhetoric and policies like El Libro Necesario, the Bolivarian government continues to propagate a very restrictive idea of national identity. I will then turn to the exhibition itself to analyse how the responses of some authors express resistance to the official concept of Venezuelan national identity. So just very briefly, the idea of nation and narration is not a new one, nor a concept specific to Venezuela. Many critics, notably Omi Baba, who coined the phrase in the title of his 1990 edited volume, have explored how writing is used to bring disparate populations into order by instilling them with a sense of shared national identity. In that volume, Timothy Brennan neatly summarises the idea, claiming that the nation is precisely what Foucault has called a discursive formation, not simply an allegory or imaginative vision, but a gestative political structure, which the artist is consciously building or suffering the lack of. Since its beginning, then, Venezuelan literary tradition has had among its most widespread values the construction of relatos identitarios arraigadores, to quote Raquel, that is, stories designed to inculcate a sense of belonging to the country within readers. As Miguel Gomez explains, in the 18th century, the foremost Venezuelan thinkers, such as Andrés Bello, Simón Rodríguez, Francisco de Miranda, and Simón Bolívar, considered their writing as pragmatic involvement in creating a country. He adds, in the years that followed the separation from Spain, literature was rarely considered an independent institution. This trend continued throughout the 19th and into the 20th century, as Bermúdez and Sánchez describe. Durante las últimas décadas del siglo XIX y la primera mitad del siglo XX, los actores culturales, en especial los intelectuales ligados a la cultura, jugaron un papel protagónico en la lucha por dotar al país de una conciencia nacional que permitiera hacer frente a la disgregación que impedía la configuración de un proyecto nacional unificador. It's no surprise, then, that the current leaders of Venezuela have built upon this long tradition of literary nationalism, with policies explicitly designed to facilitate the use of literature as a nation-building tool. I first did this presentation for people who didn't know anything about Venezuela, so this is obviously quite obvious to you, but as Richard Gott writes, Hugo Chávez's belief in a global renaissance of nationalism was one of the president's defining characteristics. Chávez notably stated, "I think we're living through a period in which nationalism is being reborn." Kenneth Roberts too describes Chavez as a throwback to Latin America's earlier populist tradition, which was characterized by strident nationalism. When it comes to literature and culture, this nationalism comes to the fore through the Ley Orgánica de la Cultura, which came into force in 2005. The law makes clear the objective of the Bolivarian government not only to link culture with a sense of national identity, but to encourage citizens to value that national identity above all others. The preamble to the law describes nuestra actividad cultural como pieza fundamental de nuestra conciencia colectiva y como la más elocuente expresión de nuestro orgullo y soberanía nacional. Moreover, in accordance with Article 6, todo ciudadano está en la obligación de honorar y defender la cultura venezolana. In practice, this translates to a series of plataformas for each of the areas of culture of which government exercises control. For literature, there is the Plataforma del Libro y la Lectura, which brings together state-run publishing houses Monte Ávila, Biblioteca Ayacucho y El Perro La Rana, as well as the National Printing Press, network of bookshops Librerías del Sur, the Centro Nacional del Libro, and the Centro de Estudios Latinoamericanos Romeo Gallegos. In the manifesto resulting from a meeting of the Plataforma in Caracas from the 27th to 29th of June 2007, they state that they are working towards el libro necesario que se escriba desde la esencia generosa del heroico pueblo venezolano a favor de la construcción de una patria motorizada por el socialismo bolivariano. Warning, there's another picture of Farruko coming up. He reacted quite badly to the last one. There he is. In addition, Francisco Sesto, who was the Minister for Culture from 2005 until 2008, repeatedly declared that the ministry would work to protect national culture from external influences and allow Venezuelans to articulate their national identity. In an interview published by El Perro La Rana in 2006 entitled El pueblo es la cultura, he sets out the ministry's objectives. Necesitamos facilitar, contribuir, nunca imponer, para que todo ese potencial que está en el pueblo vaya surgiendo, que se genere una real necesidad de expresar lo que somos y no caer de manera simplona en modelos prestados, de no caer en ramplona imitación. He maintains that literature has no value if it is not an expresión profunda del alma colectiva, adding, si no eres de un lugar, si tú no respondes a tus orígenes, no eres nadie. Through comments such as these, Sesto makes clear his disdain for those authors who do not identify with and feel pride in the same image of the Venezuelan nation that the Bolivarian government projects, in particular those authors who have chosen to leave the country. The kind of national identity that literature is expected to reflect and promote is not only geographically bounded, but firmly rooted in the past. Bermúdez and Sánchez describe this as una idea de la cultura nacional que centra la discusión en la búsqueda de una identidad nacional fundada en el pasado, en lo telúrico, en lo propio y en la defensa de nuestros ancestros. In the words of the Ministerio de Comunicación e Información, the aim is que todas las comunidades del país estén retomando la venezolanidad y reencontrándose con sus raíces, su historia, conociendo todo acerca de su ambiente, de su ámbito y su gente. However, there is concern that this vision of national identity is both too narrow and outdated. Jennifer Zapata, for example, laments that en la actualidad el Estado venezolano da por sentado que tal definición es reflejo fiel de la realidad venezolana. In this way, she implies that national identity promoted by the government is not a faithful reflection of contemporary Venezuela and is too limiting for writers today. This insistence on tradition, history, and folklore is, according to Pascal Casanova, typical of closed literary spaces. She writes, the literary nations that are most closed in upon themselves, most concerned to equip themselves with an identity, endlessly reproduce their own norms in a sort of closed circuit, declaring them national and therefore necessary and sufficient within their own autarkic market. She maintains that as nations mature, literature tends to gain more autonomy, as it is no longer needed as a tool for creating national identity. Consequently, writers are free to experiment and explore other subjects than the nation. However, the nationalist drive of the Bolivarian government means that Venezuela remains a closed literary space. It is in this closed literary space that a project like Manifiesto País becomes necessary, allowing the space for multiplicity of voices, as Angel Gustavo Infante explores in his 2002 article Estética de la Rebelión, Los Manifiestos Literarios. Over the course of the 20th century, Venezuelan authors repeatedly engaged in the creation of literary manifestos, most notably from groups like Sardo and El Techo de Balena. These manifestos not only discuss literary issues, but prove their authors to be highly concerned about and actively involved in politics, convocados por la necesidad de responder a las crisis cíclicas del poder. While Infante has labelled the period since 1981 el fin de los manifiestos, it seems fitting that, in the face of a perceived crisis, Venezuelan authors have once again turned to manifestos. As Lisbeth Salas explained in an interview with El Nacional, she chose the title Manifiesto País because, sobre todo, un manifiesto es un acto de rebelión, una acción política que provoca que un individuo o colectivos evalúen una misma historia. En este caso, esa historia se llama País. The catalyst for this desire to bring writers together to make a political stand in an increasingly fractured Venezuela was the outbreak of protests across the country in February 2014. The director of Sala Mendoza, Patricia Velasco, told the Nacional, es un proyecto para la ciudad, pero también para el movimiento estudiantil, que es el que está al frente de las protestas. Es una exposición para pensarnos, para pensar en Venezuela en positivo, para dialogar, porque eso es lo que todos deseamos. The emphasis on dialogue here is particularly important. As we can see, each poster has its own unique style, and writers were encouraged to bring their own memories, thoughts, and fears through their contributions as a reaction against state hegemony and the limited view of national identity it propagates. So these are just some of the pictures of the exhibition. As such, each of the 66 posters must be studied in detail to fully grasp the messages and implications of Manifiesto País. In addition, it would be very useful to have studies of from the authors themselves and also people who visited the exhibition to see how seeing them in person made them feel. However, time here does not allow for this, and I hope eventually to be able to turn this into a much larger research project. But for now, I just want to pick out some of the most salient themes. I must make clear that I am interested in contributions to Manifiesto País as individual attempts to make sense of national identity. One of the criticisms of Manifiesto País, especially in a polemic article by Juan Cristobal Castro, thanks for pointing out to me, which is called Que quedó del Manifiesto, is that this limited group don't have the right to speak for the whole country. However, I don't read the exhibition as an attempt to impose an answer of the meaning of country valid for all Venezuelans, but rather an attempt to encourage people to have their own personal reflections on what country means. At first glance, one of the most notable aspects of the exhibition is the equation of Venezuela with violence. We see a preponderance of red, not socialist red, but the red of spilt blood, along with guns, skeletons, military figures, as in his three striking pieces featuring texts by Juan Carlos Méndez Guedes, Ezequiel Borges, and Elisa Lerner. While Lerner, over here, contrasts happy childhood memories with the shadow of violence, and Méndez Guedes at the top. Méndez Guedes speaks optimistically of what Venezuela could be, the strength of human closeness far from the sounds of gunfire and military parades. Ezequiel Borges, in the middle, is unremittingly bleak. Country, that is Venezuela, has become for him synonymous with murder to the point that he twice asserts, ya no tengo país, because he cannot bear to be associated with such a place. This image could not be further from the heroico pueblo venezolano portrayed in the rhetoric discussed earlier, a place in which to take pride and with which to happily identify oneself. In addition, in contrast, the ancient ancestral roots referred to by Bermudez and Sanchez as forming a key part of the official conception of national identity, the emphasis in many of these texts is on smaller, more personal, familial and emotive ties to the country. One particularly noteworthy example is Enzo Garcia's piece, in which he declares, "Escribo porque no puedo marcharme del lugar donde nació mi padre, mi verdadero padre, no aquel héroe sordo e inhumano que pone apellidos y derrames sobre un país." The allusion here is, of course, the idea that We are all children of Bolivar, who is paraded as the heroic example for Venezuelans to identify themselves with as a matter of national pride, but who Garcia feels has no personal relevance to her. Venezuela itself is only significant to Garcia in as far as it is a place where her family resides, but as un colgao, she is hooked. She knows that the country is bad for her. She does not like it there, but she cannot break the ties that bind her to it. However, many other participants have left Venezuela. Through their contributions, they counteract the geographically bounded telluric vision of national identity promoted by the Bolivarian government by stressing for them how country stays with them no matter where they are. Writers who have chosen to leave the country face fierce criticism, often being referred to as traitors or not real Venezuelans, as Juan Carlos Méndez Guedes satirizes in his novel Chiapos Mambo. In reaction to this, contributions such as that of Israel Centeno highlight the influence that national identity continues to exert on people who have left the country. Centeno left Venezuela following death threats provoked by his 2002 novel El Complot, which portrays an assassination attempt against Chavez. He has lived in the United States for the last 12 years, and perhaps because of this status as an outsider, continues to feel defined by the country of his birth. In his text, he admits, "No comprendo nada si no sé de qué país lejano vengo. País es todo lo que tengo y lo habito en cualquier ámbito. Nadie me circunscribe a ti y sin embargo soy país en todas partes." He admits that there is no real reason for identifying with Venezuela. Like Enzo Garcia, he does not particularly like the country, at least not the idealized, unified whole presented by official nationalism, and yet he cannot help but define himself through his national identity. In short, while nationalist uses of literature are nothing new, the imposition of an idealized, mythologized, and telluric conception of national identity by those with power over the majority of the Venezuelan literary system clearly weighs heavily upon writers today. Manifiesto País, therefore, represents a chance for writers to use their words to counteract the hegemony of the Bolivarian government and the national myths it propagates, proposing a dialogue which reveals the complicated and often contradictory nature of identification with and sentiments towards a country, nation, or homeland. The works express anger at how violence remains a defining characteristic of the country, frustration with enduring military rule, disillusionment with myths of heroic ancestry. Yet many of the contributions also profess an inescapable feeling of belonging to, or being in some way defined by, their country of origin. For that reason, many of the works reveal a desperate hope for conditions to improve in Venezuela, which, the participants hope, begins with a recognition that Venezuelan reality is far more complicated than the idealized vision of national identity promoted through Bolivarian rhetoric.